what are the goals here today? Understanding the causes of memory problems in epilepsy, what aspects of memory are impacted in epilepsy, and how to support memory with epilepsy, or in individuals with epilepsy. Now, a lot of this information is, especially this last part, is not specific to epilepsy. It's specific to my world in the sense that a lot of neurologic disorders come with memory problems. So that's really kind of the first cause here. Problems with memory are the most common complaint that people have of any kind of neurologic disorder. It's not just epilepsy. And why is that? Well, memory involves so many different regions of the brain. So it's a very sensitive area. Everybody that walks in through my door complains about their memory, regardless of what is going on with them neurologically. But there are a lot of different types of memory problems. Not everybody's memory problem is created equal. There are different aspects of memory that I'll talk about in a few minutes. But also, people blame their memory for when they have other problems. When they're, for example, attention, concentration, processing speed. If those areas are a problem, that's going to impact how our memory functions. So when people come to me and they complain that their memory problem is, that they have a problem with their memory, my first job is to figure out, is it truly memory that is the problem in that person? So I don't have to tell people in this room that epilepsy is complicated. Everybody's epilepsy is different. I don't like epilepsy from a clinical perspective because it's so difficult. Nobody follows rules. Epilepsy does not follow rules, and it makes it so much more of a challenge to try to figure out kind of really what's going on with this person. You don't fit into neat categories with epilepsy, obviously. There are so many different types of epilepsy. And what is the cause of that person's epilepsy? Does this person have a tumor? Has this person had a stroke? Has this person had epilepsy for how many years has this person had epilepsy? All these factors impact how the severity of that person's memory complaint may be, or other cognitive complaints. Where is their epilepsy start, so to speak? What part of the brain is involved in their epilepsy? So that all contributes to the kind of memory problem, or if that person does have a memory problem with epilepsy. The number of lifetime seizures. Again, how long have they had epilepsy? How many seizures have they had in their lifetime? And how frequently are they currently still having seizures? All impacts the severity of one's memory problem. Now, even the treatment of epilepsy can contribute to memory problems. So it's not just the process itself, it's not just the epilepsy, but how we treat it that can impact how our memory works. Older anti-epileptic drugs like Tegretol and phenobarbital definitely have greater negative side effects, have greater side effects than some of the newer drugs that are used to treat epilepsy. But sometimes that's not an option for some of us. We've tried other drugs, and phenobarbital or Tegretol may be the only one that works for us. But generally speaking, the newer anti-epileptic drugs are going to have less negative consequences on memory functioning. The number of drugs that we have to take in order to control our seizures also has an impact. People on 2 drugs are going to have greater problems with their memory than people on just 1 drug. Surgery. It's kind of a given. You're going into the brain, you're going to have some negative impact of it. I don't care what the neurosurgeon tells you, how great they are and how great the surgery is, there's going to be some negative impact on cognition or memory specifically. And individuals specifically who may have temporal lobe epilepsy and actually go through a temporal lobectomy, clearly those individuals are going to have the greatest amount of memory difficulty because you're actually going in and removing the part of the brain that is responsible for processing information. So surgery in general is going to have a negative impact on memory. But yet look at it as the lesser of 2 evils. The person can't survive a day without having, multiple seizures, and cannot live an active lifestyle because of that. Obviously, that's the lesser of two evils. Other contributors to memory problems. And again, these are independent now of epilepsy. Sleep disruption. So the quality of our sleep impacts how our memory works. We need good sleep. We need to spend adequate amount of time in the deeper stages of sleep in order for information that we learn over the course of the day to be processed and encoded. That's the time where information gets transferred from short-term into long-term storage. Sleep medications can impact so we take medications to help us sleep, but Ambien, Tylenol PM that people take because it's over the counter and it's safe, or Benadryl, all those can have negative consequences on the efficiency of how our memory works. Mood symptoms. Depression and anxiety can often go along with epilepsy, but those mood disorders can also exist separate from epilepsy, obviously. Untreated mood disorders impact memory and cognition. You don't have to have epilepsy to have memory problems if the person has a depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder that is not well treated. Coexisting medical conditions, high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, heart disease, all those things disrupt in one way or another the flow of oxygen and the efficiency of processing of oxygen by the brain. So those kinds of medical conditions can impact memory. And then advanced age. I know that was one of the first questions that I was asked. As we get older, our memory does differ. Our memory changes. And age can impact memory. Put that all together and throw in a seizure disorder, obviously there's going to be some problems there. Now, memory can occur at different times during this kind of the epilepsy process. Obviously at the time when the person is having a seizure, memory formation is going to be impacted the greatest. Memory involves certain chemical activity and electrical activity to occur at a very specific rate or at a very specific sequence. And if seizures disrupt that sequence, and as a result, information that occurs that is trying to be processed at the time of a seizure is not going to be processed. So information, you're usually amnestic for events that occur at the time of a seizure, or at least you're not processing them the correct way. Postictally, so following your seizure, you're going to have inaccurate or absence of memory formation in that period, because at that point the brain is recovering. It's starting to reset its parameters on how it's electrically functioning and how it's chemically functioning. So during that rebuilding stage, you're not going to be able to process information very efficiently. And then there's people who may not have active seizures, but still have subclinical seizures. Between their active seizures, you take an EEG, there's still seizure activity going on there. Those individuals are going to have more memory complaints because, again, the chemical and electrical activity in the brain that's necessary to behave in a certain way is not doing its job that way, and therefore it's interrupting how information gets processed. So there are different levels of memory, or the different kinds of memory processing. So I'm going to go through these kind of very quickly over here, but disruption can occur at any of these levels. At the very beginning, information comes in through our senses, right? Our sight, our smell, our taste, our sense of hearing. Those are all the sources by which information gets in. So information gets in, and then it goes to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that's responsible for taking that sensory information and doing something with it, creating that memory. Well, if our senses if the information doesn't get from our senses to our hippocampus the right way, very efficiently, consistently, it's not going to be processed. Attention, concentration, how quickly we process information, all impacts how information gets to the hippocampus. I use the example down here, where did I park my car? Most of us probably parked in the parking garage. And I know that on a regular basis, I will walk out of the mall or go into the parking garage and say, I forgot where I parked my car. I'm blaming my memory. I'm assuming that the information got in and now it's no longer there for me to retrieve it. In reality, it never probably got in because I was running to get here in time and I didn't take notice of where I parked and I didn't even notice what elevator I got in and what floor I was on, and I ran in here and now I'm out there trying to find my car. Well, I took a picture of my car. Took a picture of where it was and what section it was. By doing that, I forced myself to process exactly what was going on. I know that I don't even have to refer to this picture when I go out there. Simply going through the motions and forcing myself to attend is improving my concentration and my speed of processing in that moment to allow me to take that information and send it to the hippocampus, and the hippocampus creating that memory to tell me that I'm parked on P2 section J. If I didn't do that, it's not that I forgot the information. It just never got in to start off with. So, once information goes from the hippocampus, goes to the hippocampus, so it's assumingly it makes it there, that part of the brain that lives right above your ears, right? That part of the brain is now responsible for taking that information and forming a permanent storage for it. It then takes that information and moves it into different parts of the brain where are your filing cabinets. You have separate filing cabinets for visual information, for auditory information, for smell. Different parts of the brain hold different types of information. So that information is processed in the hippocampus, but then the hippocampus ships it off to different filing cabinets throughout the rest of the brain. Well, if your hippocampus is not doing its job, information doesn't get past it. So information memory can be impacted because of injury to the hippocampus, removal of the hippocampus, and particularly with people that have temporal lobe epilepsy that have gone through a temporal lobectomy, or just the hippocampus is not working at the rate or at the efficiency that it could. And then you have this is the most common type of memory problem. It's not that we can't always process information or that we can't remember information over time, but gosh darn it, how do we get to it? When we need it on the spot, when we need to get to it, how efficient are we in being able to retrieve that information? And this is the most common complaint that most people have about their memory. It's not that they're completely oblivious to information and they've lost all this information that they learned, but they just can't get to it. They can't access it in a timely and efficient manner. And the frontal lobes are responsible for this type of memory difficulty. It's not the hippocampus any longer. Hippocampus did its job. Frontal lobes are the search engines. They're the ones they're your Google. They're the ones that are responsible for going back and finding that information from where it's stored in the different filing cabinets, so to speak. Now, there are different types of memory issues. Different types of memory. There's things like episodic memory, semantic memory, procedural memory, and perspective memory. Episodic memory is memory for very specific experiences. That conversation that you had, the party that you went to yesterday, the people that you met in your life. Those very specific episodic memories is what we refer to when we say episodic memory for experiences. Then there's semantic memory, which is memory. It's basically knowledge. It's information that you've learned. If I said to you, what's a dog? Or I asked you, what is a dog? You couldn't tell me probably when you first learned that. But through your years of being on this earth, you've added to that single idea. You've built upon that idea. You know what a dog is, and you've learned over time what, to add to that information. That's semantic memory. That's very, very much less sensitive to being lost, except in certain diseases like Alzheimer's disease, where you start to lose that information. And then there's procedural memory. That's memory to learn different steps, complex actions, and different procedures. How to ride a bike, how to play golf, how to play basketball. What you learn through kind of practice, those kinds of procedures do not involve the hippocampus. People can learn how to play golf, yet may not remember ever playing golf. If their memory, if you take out their hippocampus, they may not remember the experience of ever playing golf in their life. But if they keep playing it, they're going to get better and better at it because their procedural memory does not involve the hippocampus. So that's very insensitive. You don't forget information you don't forget procedural information. We forget more episodic information. And then there's perspective memory, which is memory for future events, remembering information, remembering to remember. And this is the most sensitive area. When people complain about their memory just doesn't seem to work, or they have more trouble in day-to-day life, it's usually they're complaining about perspective memory, forgetting about appointments, forgetting about what our intentions are. Things are falling off our to-do list, things that we said that we were going to get to and we forgot to get to. That's more perspective memory. So, 3 general ways to support memory. There's lifestyle factors, there's exercises, and there's compensatory strategies. Diet and exercise, or start with diet. Diet, nutrition. This isn't rocket science. I'm not telling you anything new that you don't already know. A healthy diet is vital for not only memory, but just generally how our brain operates, how our brain processes information, how our brain works. A healthy diet, a well-balanced diet is important. There's a lot of focus more recently on, there's a lot more focus more recently on the Mediterranean diet in particular, and a lot of the benefits that come from diet come from the cardiovascular advantages that it has. Things that are good for the cardiovascular system are going to be good for the cerebrovascular system. Your brain is very intimately related and dependent upon your heart function and your cardiovascular system. So doing things that are good for your heart are going to be good for your brain, and that includes diet. And going back to that original question about vitamins and nutrients, an appropriate levels of vitamins and minerals are necessary. So making sure vitamin B12, vitamin D, vitamin E, we're getting the proper levels of that, and that simple lab results tell you the range that you're in with these. We can have deficiencies in these areas, but taking things above and excess are not going to make a real difference. And staying hydrated. Water is vital. We tend to not drink enough water, and it's not just staying hydrated that's important, but water itself produces hormones and neurotransmitters, and it facilitates how information gets transferred. So if you're dehydrated, you're not processing information as well. Your brain isn't working the way it's supposed to. Exercise. Again, it's not rocket science here. Exercise is, there's clearly a link to a regular exercise regimen and how efficiently our brain operates. Exercising 3 to 4 times a week does support memory and cognition in the long run. And again, the benefits are seen because from the cardiovascular system. Your heart and your brain are intimately related. Stress reduction. Again, not something new, but something that is worth noting and making changes in our lives about. Stress is subjective, but stress does cause inefficiencies in how we process and we remember information. Stressful situations create a chemical called cortisol. Cortisol, in very small, appropriate amounts, is beneficial for appropriate emotional reaction to a situation. So that rush you get when you have an emergent situation or when you're frightened, that's the cortisol that you feel, among other other transmitters. But the cortisol helps us, tells us to either get out of that situation or fight in that situation. It's evolutionarily based. But it enhances our concentration, it enhances our attention, and it facilitates how we process information around us. But prolonged stress, heightened levels of stress that are that go on for longer periods of time and day in and day out result in continued cortisol levels that are at the level that are in excess of what our brain not only needs, but now can be damaging to our brain. Cortisol can serve as a toxin at those levels. And when you look at individuals who have chronic anxiety disorders, and particularly PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, people that have or individuals like, first responders, firemen, police officers that can be sometimes in prolonged stressful situations. Their cortisol levels in these individuals tend to be much higher than other individuals. And that correlates with memory difficulties because of the damage that it actually is occurring in the brain as a result of these elevated cortisol levels. So reduce our stress. Can't tell you how to reduce distress specifically in your life, but obviously, what balance can we take between work and relaxation? Spending time with our families or spending time away from our families. Active methods of reducing stress, deep breathing exercises, meditation, yoga. Those types of things that are reducing stress are going to make a difference in how efficiently our brain works. And then there's those exercises. What can we do to improve our memory? And the bottom line is there isn't a specific task that is more helpful than the other task. Our doctors may tell us, our neurologists may tell us, do crossword puzzles and read. Yes, they're valuable, but that's not more valuable than something else. If you don't like crossword puzzles, it's not going to help you. If you don't enjoy the activity, it's not going to be helpful for you. And also, doing a specific activity is not going to it's not going to generalize to better memory overall. Subscribing to things like Lumosity and other programs out there is some benefit to that, but again, it doesn't translate into memory being overall improved. The idea is that if you practice at something, you're going to get better at what it is that you're practicing on. So it's going to seem like your memory's better for that activity, but that doesn't translate into your memory being better overall. It's kind of like you practice at football, you're not going to be a better basketball player because of that. You're going to be a better football player. But socialization, the act of being around other people, being socially engaged with individuals, makes a huge difference with how efficiently our brain operates and how efficiently we process information. And in particularly, I know the question came up, as we get older, our memory changes, and is that normal? And yes, there's a normal degree of that, but as we get older, in particularly, the more we socialize, the more engaged we stay with other humans, the better off we are cognitively. So, this is kind of the third way, so to speak, compensatory strategies. And this is the most common thing that people do as far as when you look at, we can't reverse the permanent changes that have occurred in the brain as a result of either our seizures or another neurologic disorder. We can't create new brain cells, but we can compensate for some of the weaknesses that have resulted from the injuries themselves. It's kind of like the use of techniques and changing in behaviors allow us to better compensate for these activities is similar to if I take my glasses off and I look out here, I can't see anybody's face. But putting on my glasses didn't fix my eyes. It fixed how, in that moment, my eyes are being able to, how I'm better compensate for my bad vision. So these compensatory strategies don't fix our brain, doesn't fix our memory, but allows us better ways to improve on how efficiently our memory may be able to work in that specific situation. And kind of go through these a little quickly here. Improve your focus, obviously, is key to how information gets in. So I used the example of the parking garage earlier, but if information is better processed at the start, it's more likely to be remembered later on. So reducing distractions, making eye contact when talking to people, My wife has this habit of talking to me from the other room and telling me that this afternoon I got to go pick up, whatever, and remember that Ileana's got to bring her homework in tomorrow for school, make sure she gets it done. And then I blame her for not telling me afterwards. Well, I heard her, but I didn't really process it because she's talking to me from the other room. Make eye contact with people when you talk to them. And stop doing what you're doing. Get off your phone, get off your computer when people are talking to you, because that is going to improve how you attend to that information coming at you. Again, it's not a matter of forgetting. It's a matter of it never got in to start off with sometimes. Talk to yourself. I tell people all the time, talk to yourself. There's nothing wrong. You're not crazy for talking to yourself. I talk to myself all the time. I'm my most interesting person. When you're walking into a room, there's a better chance I'm going to remember what I'm walking into that room for if I tell myself that I'm walking into that room to get that tax bill. If I walk into the room and don't say that, there's a good chance I'm not going to remember what I walked in there for. And when, how many times when you go to a party and you introduce yourself, you're so busy worrying about telling that person your name that you don't even hear what they just told you their name was. Well, you know what? Take a moment, listen to what that person says, and say it out loud. Hey, Bill, I'm George. Simply doing that forces your brain to process that information so much better. Now, adding meaning to information. Basically, information, your brain doesn't know what to do with information if it doesn't have a context, if it doesn't have meaning. Lists of words, if I give you 10 words to try to remember, that's a much more difficult task than if I take those words and I create a story out of those words. You're going to remember the story. You may not remember the words. But if I put those words in the story, you're going to be able to remember that better. Visual imagery. Again, this works great with names too. Names are very difficult because they're very abstract. What's a Bill look like? What's a John look like? But if you take that information and you attach some kind of visual imagery to that person, it's going to help you remember and process that information. Grouping information together is going to be helpful. And this is a very interesting process, especially for anybody that may be taking courses in school or may have to learn very technical information. It's this method that came out, it's been around for 50 years at least, but it's how to read information in order to process it. Going through the steps, and if you actually Google this, there's a few websites out there that actually kind of spell out what each of these processes do. But the more these processes right here add meaning to information that's going to help you remember it better. Now, repeating information. Simply just repeating and rehearsal is not always good enough to remember information. It's how you do it. You have to space information. If I sat there and I read this material for 5 hours on end, aside from getting a headache, I'm not going to be able to process that information as efficiently. If I still have 5 hours to do it, if I take that information and I break it down into 20-minute intervals, and every 20 minutes, take 5-minute break, walk outside, get some air, do something else, and then come back to it. That 5 minutes, you're letting that information simmer. You're letting that information consolidate, and you're letting your brain do something with that information and start moving it into long-term storage, and then pick up the pace again, or pick up the study pace again and go back to studying. And adding information, rehearse it and then add a little bit more. So studying information in smaller bits is going to be much more helpful than reading it all the way through and then reading it all the way through again and reading it all the way through again. Improve your organization, and that's organizing information, but organizing your situation, our lives. Keeping personal items, in a specific location, avoids us obviously misplacing them and the frustration that we spend looking for them as we're running out of the house trying to find our watch and our wallet and our keys. There's very specific examples here that I don't want to spend all the time kind of going through. You can look at these on your own, but, ways to kind of organize the mail at home. Even following a recipe, remembering kind of how to follow certain recipes. Read through it first. measure out the ingredients ahead of time. All those things are going to lead to being more successful in kind of the end result. It's compensating for our weaknesses. Even when creating a shopping list, I know myself, I've been to that same supermarket, I don't know how many times before, but I'm constantly, I'll walk down the same aisles 3 different times trying to find things if I don't take that list and I organize it ahead of time. If I have milk at the top and eggs at the bottom, I'm going to visit that same aisle twice because if I don't take it and organize it. At this point, I've created a diagram of that supermarket and broken it, made my shopping list into aisles, and I put those things in the aisles. Now I can get in and out of there for 20 minutes. I'm still paying 3 times as much as my wife pays for the same items. I don't know where that is. But, those kinds of strategies help to kind of how efficiently our memory works. Organized information to be completed. Obviously, if you're going to have to drive to 10 different locations before coming home, organize the destinations accordingly. Okay. And establish routines and simplify our lives. What can we do to improve, again, how efficiently we process information? When I do all my notes, I do my notes in the morning. I get up before the ladies in my life get up, and I sit in my office, I lock the door, and I spend a couple hours doing my notes. If I try to do those same notes at the end of my day, it's going to take me twice as long, and I probably won't even understand what I'm writing at the end because I'm just spent at that time of day. So know when you're most focused. Organize your day in that way. Schedule things that you can schedule at certain times to be efficient, especially tasks that are less desirable, things that we don't want to do. Put them on your schedule because that's going to keep you from procrastinating and forgetting about how to do it because you ran past the deadline. Obviously, writing information down. Most common strategy. Writing information down not only allows us to refer to it later, but the act of writing helps us process information better. So going through that. And on a completely aside, computers, we've lost something with computers. The act of writing is not the same, or typing into a computer is not the same as writing it. Writing makes a big difference. Incorporating smartphones and calendars, some ways our memory is getting worse with our smartphones. I can't tell you my wife's phone number. I can find it, but I don't need to remember anymore. It's all in here. But these can obviously be godsends in a lot of ways. Using of voice memos, and even now with smart pens where they translate what you write into electronic information. The more brain systems you involve, if you depend just on your hippocampus, that part of the brain that may be a problem in certain individuals for forming memory, if you just depend on that, you're going to have greater difficulty. But if you can incorporate other brain systems to process information, you're going to be able to process information better. Like I said before, writing down information, you involve motor areas of the brain, you involve the auditory areas of the brain because now you're hearing things, saying things out loud. All those things working together, you're employing more brain power to remember that and process that information. So synchronizing how that is important. And one very specific example is when you read. When you read, how quickly your eyes process information or are taking in information, it can be different in how quickly your brain can process information. If because of seizures or medications to treat our seizure disorders, information may not be able to be processed as quickly. Your eyes, though, may still be taking in information quicker than your brain can process it. So you can't speed up your brain, but you can slow down your eyes. So when you're reading, use a straight edge. Cover the lines below what you're reading. What that does is it forces your eyes to wait for your brain to finish processing the information. Then move down to the next one. And while you're doing that, read out loud. Not loud enough so the neighbors next door can hear you, but loud enough so you can hear you. Because now you're employing different parts of the brain to process that same information. And guarantee you use those two things together, you're going to have to reread the same thing much less frequently in order to process it. Again, this is how you synchronize how different parts of the brain are working. Okay. And obviously use of alarms and things like that. So I think we're out of time, but I guess open up the questions.
Is it possible to measure cortisol levels? Like, how do you determine someone reporting stress or behaving in a stressed out manner that the person has high cortisol levels?
That cortisol levels, I mean, they're not routinely measured.
Right.
It's not like you go to a doctor and say,
exactly.
can you measure my cortisol level?
Right.
They're looked at it experimentally at this point, but you can measure cortisol levels through CSF. It's actually through the cerebrospinal fluid.
Okay.
You can measure it. So it's the active. It's a hormone, and if it's circulating through at certain levels in the cerebrospinal fluid, it can be measured. But again, it's not something you measure regularly.
Right.
It's just the link has been seen in research that cortisol does have a toxic effect when it's in excess. When it's there and it's hanging out in the cerebrospinal fluid and going into the brain and access to the brain, at high levels and prolonged times, it's going to have a negative impact. Just like alcohol.
Right.
Alcohol in moderation is okay, but when we pickle our brain with drinking regularly, excessively on a regular basis, then it has, irritant effects on the brain. It actually does physical damage to the cells.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
How much sleep should we get per night to make us function better in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
In the night, I'm woke up 3 or 4 times to get up and back in the bed.
That's a great question. That's a tough question to answer because not everybody is specific. I mean, not everyone has the same. The one thing that is true is, there's this fallacy that as we get older, we need less sleep. That's not true. If you look at a chart, yes, we may need a little bit less sleep as we get older. Obviously, children, infants need ridiculous amounts of sleep, and then, we decrease up to a point. But then once we reach adulthood, older adulthood and younger adulthood, it's not that much of a difference. You should get minimum 6.5 hours of sleep in order for your brain to be working efficiently. But it's a tougher question to answer than that because it's not just the amount of time that you're sleeping, but the amount of time that you're spending in stages 3 and 4 of sleep, which is the deeper stages of sleep. People that have sleep apnea, for example, aside from the hypoxic effects of sleep apnea, where you're depriving your body of oxygen, even if that wasn't as severe, when people fall into the stages 3 and 4 of sleep, that's when their apneas come about. They stop breathing, then emergency mode kicks in, and your brain kind of forces you to start breathing again. But what that does is it kicks you out of stages 3 and 4. It bumps you back up to 2. If you don't spend enough time in 3 and 4, then that is the point. That's where memory consolidation lives, and that's the repair time for your brain. Your brain needs to be in stages 3 and 4 enough time over the course of a night in order to function well the next day and consolidate information. People that spontaneously wake up in the middle of the night, and then they're spending more time trying to get back to stages 3 and 4. So they're wasting time that they could be spending in stages 3 and 4. So you need to so addressing sleep problems is important. And what I suggested to the other, there was a couple individuals that asked questions about sleep last session. I have a whole list of behavioral strategies to consider. Sleep is very much psychological. We learn how to not sleep. Just like infants, for those of us who can remember back to when you first had, an infant and you're trying to teach them how to sleep, you got to get them on a schedule because you have to teach person how to sleep. Well, you have to sometimes reteach yourself, if you have insomnia, how to sleep. So there's a lot of behavioral things that you can do to improve your sleep hygiene, so to speak. So I'd be happy to share those with you. If anyone is interested, you can just shoot me an email. So, yes.
You spoke about the over-the-counter sleep medication. What about melatonin? Is that in the same group?
No, melatonin is fine. But well, melatonin is the chemical that your brain produces naturally to help promote sleep. So the melatonin that you're buying is synthetic. It's used to mimic and stimulate the same receptors in the brain to fool them into creating it basically kind of it works a little differently than that, but it tells the brain centers to start producing its own melatonin by triggering those same receptor sites. But melatonin is beneficial for some people. It doesn't work consistently. That's the problem. Some people think it's a godsend and it really works for them, and other people doesn't seem to do too much of anything. And it all depends, again, on that blood-brain barrier, how efficiently that gets through, and it helps some people and it doesn't other people. What I'm talking about when I say sleep medications is things like, Benadryl and Tylenol PM. People use those all the time because they're over the counter, so they're safe. But what those do is they have what's called anticholinergic effects. They decrease the level of acetylcholine in your brain temporarily, but they decrease the levels of that chemical. Well, guess what chemical is most important for healthy cognitive and memory functioning? Acetylcholine. So, you're depriving your brain of a chemical by taking that drug that is a fit that you need in order to have good. That's why you have those hangover effects when you take sometimes those medications. The next day, you're kind of more foggy, you're not processing information that well. It's because you depleted kind of the levels of acetylcholine. So it's those that I'm more referring to. Melatonin's great if it works for you.
We're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Doctor,
My
for
pleasure.
coming out today.
My pleasure.